Wetlands, yeah. The wetlands would look like this, right? The price is zero. Well, there's probably a cost associated with an opportunity cost of giving them up. But what is the market for ducks? Ducks Unlimited has actually taken this approach, a market approach, to solving the reduction in wetlands. Nature Conservancy does the same. They buy land specifically to capture this consumer surplus and to be able to manage it. When they do that, they can actually charge people then use and take that revenue and pour it back into the resource. But in a case like this, we've got a lot of wildlife in the north. Caribou is a big thing. There's a huge study on caribou right now because the population is dwindling. Is there a market for caribou? No. You can't go to a Safeway and buy a big caribou steak tonight for supper, can you? You can in Finland, though. Finland and Sweden. Last time I was there, I was in Helsinki, and we had this company was sort of wining and dining us. So you heard of Spanish tapas? Small little delicacies of Spain. Anyway, this was their answer to Spanish tapas, and they called them Finnish sapas. And so out came all this food, and there was raw reindeer heart, and raw reindeer tongue, and some other unmentionable bits and pieces that were equally as unpalatable. So, why was I talking about? Oh yeah, because there's a market for reindeer. And so there's people who raise them, reindeer husbandry, and guess what? No shortage of reindeer there. And reindeer and caribou are the same. So there's no shortage, or we're not running out of them because there's value placed on them. Okay? So we're going to think about how to use this market framework to manage non-market type goods and services. Okay. So this is mostly the demand. There's a couple other things here. We'll look at the supply. So we've got total revenue, consumer surplus, and total value. With respect to the supply, we have P times Q. So this whole rectangle is total revenue. But we can divide the rectangle into two pieces. TC is this area down here. And PS on top. PS equals producer's surplus. And TC equals total cost. Because the supply curve is actually the marginal cost curve, if you calculate the area under the supply curve, you get the total cost. So we could take a supply function, differentiate it, and integrate it, and do all those kind of things. We could also just look at the graph and say this is total cost. So total revenue minus total cost equals producer's surplus. And this is the amount the producer collects above cost. You could think of it in an accounting sense as profit. We also call it entrepreneurial rent, the amount that the producer is going to get for having this business and undertaking risk. And so that is the reason that people go into business, right? There's a cost of production, and anything above that cost goes to the producer. So when you look at this picture, you can see the whole thing. There's total value, consumer surplus, producer surplus, and total cost. So you get all that information with a relatively simple graph. So next what you can do is think about what happens to consumer surplus and producer surplus when we have a shortage or a surplus, when there's price fixing above equilibrium price or below equilibrium price, and see what actually happens to producer surplus. when we looked at the housing example, if you fix the price too low, it was PL, demand, supply, quantity, and price. Here's the producer surplus in there. If you allow prices to fluctuate, this is the amount that you could get. So there's a really big incentive to allow that price to fluctuate, and the producer will then have a reason to produce more, supply more. So when you think about incentives and the shapes of these curves, whether they're very steep or very shallow, we'll talk about elasticity, you can see why people behave they do, the way they do. Any questions? A lot of this should be reviewed, but I want you to think about it in real terms. Like read the newspaper and think about what's happening with supply and demand. Why are those curves shifting? Price doesn't change for any reason. It's got to change because of these things. So once you understand why that is and what's happening with the incentives, the producer surplus, you can understand why people harvest or plant or operate the way they do. You can understand why consumers purchase or not purchase goods and services. Okay. I feel like I've been up here for 3 hours. I don't know about you guys. So I feel like I've been up here for 3 hours for you as well? Yeah? Okay, well, anyway. I always thought it was funny that if you take a class on this campus 3 times a week, it's 50 minutes times 3, it's 150 minutes. If you take it twice a week, you're in here for what? 80 minutes, twice a week, so you're at 160 minutes. If you take 1 class a week, it's that 3-hour night class, pain and suffering, and you're in there for 180 minutes. So the longer you have to sit here, the longer you have to sit here. And it seems odd that, you know, stopping and starting eats up a bit of time. So the longer the class, the more efficient. So they should be shorter. Anyway, I also think education is the only thing that you're really happy to pay for when you get less of it. You paid your tuition, you just want me to shut up now and start the weekend. Shut up. Okay.